Helpu Hunan guided self-help courses to improve your mental well-being. This is a guided self-help course on stress management and relaxation. Hello, my name's Kathy and I work for Havel as a recovery practitioner across Gwent, South Wales. I work as a part of a team that aim to support people with mental illnesses across South Wales. And one of the ways that we do that is we work with people one-to-one or in small groups through some self-help courses. So we've actually developed our own range of self-help resources that we use for people, and we call that Helpu Hunan. So for those of you that don't speak Welsh, it basically means self-help. So one of those courses I'm going to talk through with you on this video. The course goes over a few weeks. Okay, so for this particular video I'm just going to do the first week of the course, and then every week following that I will do another snippet of that stress management course. So this stress management course is all about looking at ways to learn about stress, how it affects us and what the causes of it are, and then aiming to sort of manage that stress a little bit better in our lives, because we can't eliminate stress completely. Unfortunately, stress is just a part of all of our society at the moment, unfortunately. So it's about managing it and stop it from escalating into more severe anxiety or panic. So please just give this a try, engage as much as you can with it. So if you do want to write some notes, that would be great to make it more personal to you. I would say if you are struggling to concentrate, or you're struggling in general at the moment, do break it down into chunks if you need to. You can always dip in and out of this course as and when you need to. Okay, so I hope you get some benefit from this. I'm going to start talking you through now, as I would do, imagining that I'm doing a one-to-one session with you. You can imagine that we're doing that together as I talk you through this stress management course. Okay, so let's start just by thinking about how we can understand what stress is and what causes it. So on this page you've got a couple of little things just to get you thinking about stress. And the first one is, how would you define stress? And this is where you can have a think about this. If you want to, you can write some thoughts down, because stress can affect everybody differently. So you need to be thinking about what actually is stress and what does it mean to me. There's no right or wrong answers for this. So you can jot your own thoughts down here if you want to, and I'll explain a little bit about stress from my perspective, what I sometimes teach to people. So stress is basically an unpleasant and uncomfortable feeling. It's a sensation that we can feel in our emotions, in our physical health, and it's often due to a feeling of a high demand in our lives. So feeling under pressure to do lots of different things. So it's almost like you can imagine little arrows being fired at you. Those are kind of stress arrows, and they get fired at you from all directions. So as well as feeling that sort of increased demand in our life, people who get stressed often underestimate their own ability to cope. So, you know, you feel like there's a lot going on in your life and you feel like you're not going to be able to cope with it. And that's really what escalates that feeling of stress, and it can create a more troublesome anxiety Okay, so thinking about what your own feelings of stress might be and how they sort of show themselves in your mind, in your body, and then thinking about what are the causes of stress. Again, there's no right or wrong for this one, but you might want to start thinking about what are your own causes, what's going on here, what are my triggers, what's leading me down this path to make me feel more worked up, more stressed. There's a lot of different factors that come into play in terms of making you feel under pressure and under stress. Firstly, there are certain personality types that tend to be a little bit more vulnerable to stress. People that are very sort of hard on themselves, very sort of perfectionistic, trying to get everything just right, you know. People with all of that drive within themselves, they tend to feel more prone to stress. But also it depends on our upbringing, on our background. Again, the people that I work with quite often, if they've had trauma or any kind of difficulties in the past, it can sometimes lead them to being more vulnerable to stress in the present. And that leads us to think about what are the things in the present that can actually trigger you to feel stressed. So again, there's a huge amount of things, and this is going to be different for everybody. I'll list a few that people talk to me about. Bereavement, so losing a loved one. Changing job or moving house. Coming down with a physical health problem or disability. Coping with pain. Coping with underlying mental health difficulties. Having difficulties with family or friends or personal relationships, difficulties with those dynamics, financial strain and stress. That's just to name just a few. I'm sure you can think of your own triggers here for what you think might be driving any stress for you. And that's really the first stage in you managing stress in the future, is to understand what the triggers are first of all, and then trying to cope and manage some of those triggers. Okay, so now we've considered what the causes of stress are and what stress actually is for us, we can move on to thinking about what the effects of stress are. First of all, physically, so how stress and anxiety can affect our bodies. So you might have heard of something called the fight or flight response. Don't worry if you haven't. But it's basically our bodies have got this instinctive sort of automatic way of responding to a feeling of danger, a feeling of being under threat. Okay, so we may not be under any particular danger ourselves if we think about things from that logical kind of perspective, but what it is for us is we've developed this this kind of alarm system. We've got an area of the brain actually called the amygdala, and you can imagine that as the kind of car alarm, a kind of car alarm that goes off when it doesn't need to. So maybe somebody's brushed against the car and it sets off the alarm. So our brain has got that amygdala, which is a little bit like that faulty car alarm system in the brain. That alarm system triggers a surge of adrenaline and other stress hormones in the body. Those stress hormones flood the body and create a lot of physical changes. All the physical changes it creates are basically a way of trying to get your body ready to fight what's coming towards it, or to run away, or to stand and freeze on the spot. Okay, so all of the physical effects of anxiety or stress that we get are due to that fight or flight response, so that rush of stress hormones in the body. So it affects everybody differently, so have a think now about how does stress affect you physically. So there's a whole wide range of physical effects, so I can list a few. So a lot of people say to me that they get short of breath, they feel like their heart is racing, they feel that their chest is getting tight. Some people feel a little bit of pain around the chest. Quite often there's a lot of muscle tension. So if you ever feel like your shoulders are raising up towards the ceiling, feeling tight, that's because of the muscle tension. You also can get things like feeling sweaty, feeling red in the face, getting some nausea, digestive problems, shaking or a tremor. So that's just to name a few of the most common effects. So you have a think and make a note if you want to of some of the physical ways that stress is affecting you. You can go on to think then about when the last time that you felt stressed was. So it might have been that you had something happen today or yesterday or within the last few days. Try and think about the last time that you felt your stress or your anxiety rising. Think about what was the situation at the time. So think about where were you, who were you with, and what was going on. So all of these contribute to what things are triggers for you. So when you've had to think about that, you can then go on to really remembering at that time when you felt the stress, what feelings in your body did you have? So what were your physical feelings of stress? So you can have a think about that and write those down. So knowing about those sort of signs of stress in the body can actually be really helpful, because they're the kind of early warning signs that you can be aware of. And when you can be aware of them earlier rather than later, it actually helps you to combat that stress at an earlier stage rather than letting it escalate. So that's why looking at these physical effects can be really, really helpful. Okay, so now we've spoken about the physical effects of stress and anxiety, we can now have a think about how stress can affect us in our minds, in our emotions. So have a think for yourself how stress is affecting your emotions. Like I've said, stress is on that sliding scale of mild stress, then becoming anxiety, or even into panic. So stress in itself is an emotion, but there are other emotions that can happen alongside that feeling of stress. So as well as anxiety, you can have other feelings. The most common ones really are a feeling of perhaps irritation or anger, depression, also feeling low. That can also happen when you're feeling stressed. Sometimes we get sort of self-critical thoughts making us feel guilty. So there's a huge range of different emotions that we can feel when we're under stress. So have a think of those particular emotions that you feel. Keep a mental note or jot them down. And then think about, how does stress impact on your day-to-day life? So stress can have a huge impact. It can actually make you do things differently. So it might make you reduce some of the things that you do. So you might avoid things. Or it might make you do more of certain things. Maybe if you're trying to stop smoking, for instance, it might make you want to smoke more. Might make you want to drink more. or use a whole range of different coping strategies, some of which can be helpful, some of which might not be so helpful in the longer term. So it's bound to have a whole range of effects on your own life. So have a think for yourself, what are the most important sort of impacts that stress is having on you to bring you here to try and want to make those changes. And then think about the wider picture as well. So just for you to think about, does the stress that you feel and the anxiety that you're under, does that have any impact on people perhaps that you live with, your family, people that you love or care for, or your friends or your wider neighbourhood? Okay, so there may be some impact upon other people in your life as well. So again, have a little think, make a mental note or jot down your thoughts on that one before we move on to the next. So the next page is the last page of the first week of this course. So on this page we're looking at how your thoughts, your feelings and your behaviours are all linked together, and how sometimes they can form a bit of a circle. Sometimes we feel a bit stuck, and that's because we're getting ourselves into a kind of vicious circle where we feel we can't get out. So our thoughts can affect our feelings, and then our feelings can affect our behaviours, and our behaviours then can affect our thoughts, and so it goes round in a circle. So just to explain that a little bit more, so in terms of our thoughts, when we have stress or anxiety, quite often we have some unhelpful thinking patterns. So quite often we misjudge our ability to cope. So we say to ourselves, I can't cope with this. And quite often we think about the worst case scenario, what's going to happen. So we believe something terrible is going to happen. And because we have those thoughts, it makes us believe, oh, it must be bad, if I'm thinking like this about it. So we can have lots and lots of different thoughts going through our mind, and it's perfectly normal to have lots of those thoughts going through our mind. What can sometimes happen with people with stress or anxiety is we tend to focus on those thoughts a bit more and give the thoughts more power. And when we're believing those thoughts, it can then trigger a lot of feelings of stress and anxiety. So we get that feeling of anxiousness or fear. As we've said earlier, it can trigger the physical feelings as well, changes in our body due to the fight or flight response. So if you can imagine that you're in a situation where you've got something happening that is triggering those unhelpful thoughts, triggering those anxious feelings, and because you feel so bad, then of course it's understandable that you're going to change what you do to try and cope with it. So some people avoid things, so they might avoid that situation, avoid going to that particular shop, or avoid talking to a particular person. You might sort of, we say escape or freeze, so again, avoidance really of some situations. And I've said earlier really that we can have lots of different ways of changing our behaviour. So sometimes we use things like alcohol or smoking to try and dampen down some of that anxiety. So you can see why that has happened, due to that vicious circle of how you're feeling. It does go round in the circle though, because some of the things that we do, even though it can help us to begin with, what it can actually do is to reinforce those negative thoughts that we have about ourselves. So those thoughts of I can't cope, or perhaps then you'd go and avoid doing that thing, and it then teaches you, oh, I've avoided it, so I know I can't cope with it. So I hope that makes sense, but it's that sort of, that sort of lack of self-belief, which then changes your behaviour, leads to some avoidance, and then it's again triggering those kind of self-critical thoughts, really. So keeping that anxiety going, because those thoughts then lead to more uncomfortable feelings, that lead to a change in your behaviour, which then lead to more unhelpful thoughts. So the first thing we need to do is be aware of that cycle, that circle that can go round and round, and know that we can break that cycle. And if we can break that cycle, actually our stress, our anxiety is going to become so much better for us. We'll be able to manage it more. So the way that I talk through this, trying to help people with it, is we can look at changing those feelings. So some relaxation exercise, some things that can help those physical sensations that you get. If we can dampen down some of that physical feeling of stress in our body, it can help the rest of the circle. Sometimes we can look at changing particular behaviours, so looking at things that you can do to help yourself. Again, that will break the circle. We can also look a little bit at thoughts, try to challenge some of those negative thoughts, the self-critical thoughts, and by doing that again, breaking that part of the cycle. So that's how it all slots together. So I hope you find that useful. You can keep looking at that cycle and see if you can recognise your own thoughts, feelings and behaviours when you have a situation that triggers your stress or anxiety. You can always write those things down. Keep a little journal if you want to of situations that have triggered the anxiety. You might want to write down what were your thoughts at the time, what were your feelings, and what did you do to cope. And knowing that can then help you to move forward into the next few sessions. So that brings us to the end of the first session in this course. I really hope you found it useful so far. Thanks for sticking with it till the end. I hope you found something useful from it. Over the next few sessions we'll be talking a lot more about the ways to reduce the stress for you. In our next session we'll be looking at the 5 ways of well-being and thresholds for coping. So both of those are really good things to try to manage the anxiety and the stress. So I really hope you can join me for the next ones. Okay, so until then, you take care. Bye for now.